patient, 62-year-old, presented with a head injury at hospital. That's how it says. Okay, so the title of this talk is Global Warming and Climate Change, Thoughts of a Quaker Scientist. I've given this talk about 5 times starting about 5 years ago, to this cohort of students like you that come here on the summer. And what I say has changed every year. And the reason it's changed is because the science has changed. And people are now assuming things that could not be assumed 5 years ago. So I could never have given this talk 5 years ago. I would never have dreamed of mentioning religion and morality, which is what I'm going to talk a little bit about, in a scientific talk. That's just the sort of thing you do not do. But if you now believe that the evidence for global warming is as strong as you are ever going to get, then I think it is beholden on people like me to introduce these different issues. So, do we panic and are we doomed? Well, I think we should panic. Whether we're doomed depends on what we do collectively. And when I say collectively, I don't mean people in this room or in this country. I mean the whole world. And then what can we do? What issues can we individually do and make a difference, if any? And then what should we do? What do we have a moral obligation to take action to try to avert the worst of climate change? So I've only got 12 slides, which for a talk of 50 minutes is not many. Only about 4 of them are going to be scientific. And then I'll get on to the morality and things we should think about doing. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the correlation between carbon dioxide concentrations on this planet, in our atmosphere, and the temperature of our planet. Is it proven? Well, you may be surprised to hear me say this, but I think the answer is not yet. And if you think about this, what does proven actually mean? What is actually proven in science? I think most people would accept now that if you have lung cancer and if you are a heavy smoker, those 2 facts are probably related. But that doesn't actually prove that being a heavy smoker will give you lung cancer. There's a good chance it will, but that's not proof. And if you disagree with that, I know 2 or 3 people who are not smokers and yet have ended up with terminal lung cancer. So this business of what does proof mean is very almost philosophical phrase. And in my opinion, this correlation, which everybody thinks is very likely, but it's not proven. So in the second part of the talk, I'm going to talk about if we do accept that there is this correlation, and then we have a real serious global problem on our hands, and we've got to do something. And do something means as an individual level, it means at a national level, which in this country means what can the UK government do about this when they're not arguing about bloody Brexit. That was a joke. I call it Brexit, the business where we get out of the European Union. I call it bloody Brexit. A total waste of time. Should never have happened. Thank you very much. And what can we do internationally? By internationally, I mean, well, what can the European Union do? What can the blessed United States do? perhaps more serious, what can the United Nations do? In other words, organizations which encompass many, many different countries. The other thing I have to do is I have to keep drinking fluid. It helps my voice. So 2 or 3 slides on science. This is a wonderful picture that shows quite clearly that the concentration of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere is rising. This is data going from about 1955 up to 2015. I think you can all read the numbers. Here the level is 310 parts per million. We're now up to 400. And the rise is absolutely relentless. Nobody can argue, surely, that the CO2 concentrations are going up. And the other interesting thing is within every year there is a little blip, little oscillations, because in the summer the concentration of CO2 is at a slightly different level for what it is in the winter. And the difference depends on where you are on the planet. This is on the observatory on Hawaii. But if you were to make these measurements in Antarctica, you wouldn't get such a pronounced dip between the peaks and the troughs. This is all to do with photosynthetic activity of vegetation. Okay, so that's the CO2 side of this problem. It is going up. If you want to express this as a percentage, then the concentration of CO2 has gone up from about 300 to about 400 over 50 or 60 years. That's a percentage increase of about 30%. If I were to present the same data for methane and express it, the numbers would be smaller, but the percentage rise is much greater. In fact, there has been a 150% increase in methane concentrations from the before the Industrial Revolution to today. 150%. And if I have one scientific point I would like to suggest to you, it is that this global warming issue is not just all about CO2. It's CO2 and methane. And personally, I think the methane problem is every bit as serious as the CO2 problem. So that's an extraordinary slide. What the hell does that mean, you're probably thinking? I've got 2 sets of data there. I haven't labeled any axes. I've got a red data, few blicks, but basically red is rising as the whatever is on the x-axis increases from left to right. And then I've got blue data, which goes up and down, much more noisy, but essentially it shows a rise. And the question is, what's written there, does the red data correlate with the blue data? In other words, does the red data cause the blue data? Or does the blue data cause the red data? And when you just see that data there, most scientists would surely say, well, they might be related, but there's no proof. You can't prove anything. I could show you 2 sets of data which seem to rise together. That doesn't mean that A and B are correlated with each other. Now, I don't know whether people have seen that picture, because what I'm now going to do is add the labels of the axes. Okay, so the x-axis is time from roughly 100 40 years ago up to the current day. The blue data is what we think is the global temperature of the planet. It has gone up, but sometimes it's gone up high. Sometimes there have been dips like there. There's much more error in that data. And the red data is, of course, the carbon dioxide concentration. And I just showed you the bit very accurate from 1955 to 2015. So I just showed you that the bit of the red data. And if you don't believe this, there are any number of these pictures on the web. Okay, they're on the web. Anybody can put anything on the web, alas. But there they are. There's the reference. This site came from America, so they use Fahrenheit. So the temperature axis is Fahrenheit. Okay, here's 0, here's -1, here's +1. And for those of you that don't know, a rise of 1 Fahrenheit is equivalent to just over half a rise, or a degree centigrade or Kelvin. Okay, so roughly we have gone from about -0.5 to roughly about 0.8. So we've gone about 1.3 Fahrenheit over this time period, which is about 1 degrees Kelvin. Okay, so we've already risen 1 Kelvin since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And of course, the Industrial Revolution is 1750, which is way over here on the left-hand side. But there's not much difference between 1750 and 1880. Now, I'm sure some of you will know about the big Paris Convention that took place under the United Nations 2.5 years ago. And there, the hope, well, it's written down as strong in language as you can possibly get, that it is hoped that the world will limit the temperature increase to 2 degrees, if not 1.5 degrees. But let me just remind you, we're already 1 degree there. So if it's 2 degrees, we're halfway there. If it's 1.5 degrees we're aiming for, we're 2/3 of the way there. And that is the severity of the problem. In the next 80 years, 82 years, by the end of this century, we've got to try to limit our temperature increase to either 1.5 or 2 degrees. Everybody hopes it will be 1.5, but even the greatest optimists accept that that is unlikely. Now, within enough, we will be rid of Mr. Trump in America in 2 years' time. So, because as I'm sure you know, he has pulled America out of the Paris Agreement, and then America would, and if America carry on as they are with their attitudes to global warming, they're just going to become a pariah state, in my opinion, a pariah country. Dare I say it, almost a bit like North Korea are at the moment. I really believe that. If we carry on with Trumpism, whatever you wanted to call it, it is probably the most serious thing he's done, because it affects the whole world and everybody on the world. Then I think America would just become a pariah state. If we ever get to 3 degrees, then we are in serious problems. If we get more than 3 degrees, even more serious problems. The experts call this the runaway greenhouse effect. Let me try to explain what I mean by that. If the temperature of the planet goes up by 3 or 4 or 5 degrees, that means that more water can be kept in the gaseous state in the atmosphere. And again, we talk about CO2 and methane, but those are what we call secondary greenhouse gases caused by person's activity in the last 300 years. the biggest greenhouse gas is not those two, it is water. And water has been there for thousands of years. So if anybody thinks the greenhouse effect is bad news, you're wrong. You are totally wrong. The temperature of our planet is the happy, roughly 70 degrees centigrade that it is because of the primary greenhouse effect. But if we have more and more water in the atmosphere, the primary effect is going to get bigger and bigger, and the temperature is going to go up and up. And that's what the modelers call the runaway greenhouse effect. In other words, we are not going to be able to stop it. And they say that if we get to 3 degrees, or 4 degrees, or 5 degrees, I fully accept that experts think differently about what that number is. But they all agree there is an effect that might kick in unless we could do something. So Paris tried to say stop at 2 degrees, and if possible 1.5 degrees is great, but just remember we're already 1 degree there. So that is the seriousness of the problem, put in simple language. Steve told me that most of you people are scientists. Is that right? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to call you intelligent, non-expert scientists. And I have actually written 2 papers on what I'm going to be talking about. In fact, I got the proof of the second paper literally half an hour ago. And I give you the DOI number at the end. And these papers are very much written for just you sort of people, young, intelligent, non-expert. Okay, because you are going to have to deal with this problem. You can't run away from it, I'm afraid. I'm going to give my voice a rest now. Hope this works. This is what might happen in the Arctic. Oh. So that is what Greenpeace think is going to happen in the Arctic if we don't get a grip on this global problem. But okay, putting a grand piano on an iceberg with a picture drop of the Arctic behind is good gimmicky stuff, but that's serious. That's what they think might happen. So I'm going to now move on, and I'm going to say that despite what I've just said, that there is not the absolute proof, where absolute proof means 100% certainty. I'm going to assume that global warming is for real, and we've got to do something about it. Now, I'm not a deeply religious person. My spiritual life goes round in circles. I sometimes call it a random walk in spiritual space. But I have joined or been part of the Quaker movement for the last 30 years or so. And although the Quaker movement is international, there may be many here who do not know about it. So if I could just say literally 2 minutes about what we believe. It was founded in this country in 1652 by this gentleman, George Fox, in the north of England. Those were the clothes that they wore then. This is me on the Yorkshire coast taken a year ago. This is the clothes that we wear now. So clothes and dressing up is not part of the religion at all. There is only one universal belief, that there is that of God in everyone. And everyone really does mean everyone. You, me. Now, having said that, what that three-letter word God means is open to huge numbers of interpretations. And if I'm absolutely certain of anything, if I got 100 Quakers in this room, they would give me 100 different answers to what that sentence means. But from that has risen what we call the testimonies out of Quakerism. And these are ways we lead our lives, because there is inner conviction that your life and your religious beliefs, which might be non-religious beliefs, are two sides of the same coin. And some of these testimonies are long-standing, going back hundreds of years, and some are quite recent. The ones that go back a long time are ones of social justice, truth and integrity. What that means is you tell the truth at all times. You don't tell lies. The language of false truth is completely alien to the Quakers. We believe in equality. That's equality between men and women, between rich and poor, between old and young. Simplicity, we try to live our lives simply. That is a difficult one, because that can mean so many different things to different people. And the two most recent testimonies are the one that I think came in at the start of the 20th century, just before the First World War, of peace and non-violence, from which came about the movement of conscientious objection, where you can now, heaven forbid, if somebody asked me to fight a war, I would have to say, no, I'm a registered conscientious objector, I cannot do that. That all originated from the Quakers around 1910, I think. And then in the last 10 years only, we have a testimony about Earth and the environment and how we should look after it so that we pass it on in as good a state as we can to our successors. And again, of those 6 testimonies, I could spend an hour talking about each of those ones. But the ones that are relevant to this climate argument are ones on social justice, equality, and obviously Earth and the environment. And let me just say why I think the social justice one is relevant. We are in the mess we are in this world because of the rich first world countries, mostly Europe, America, and others. And if we had created the problem, then surely there is a social justice argument that we should lead in trying to sort it out. That's my words. Equality, we have to come to the fact that a lot of this issue is going to affect people, poor people, especially in the southern hemisphere, those living on low-lying islands. And if you really believe in equality, those people have as much right to a decent life as lucky people like me living in the northern hemisphere in Birmingham. But as I said at the bottom, we must not turn our clock back on science and technology. We cannot just say, turn the clock back 300 years and live life as we lived it in the 1750s. We're never going to get anywhere there. Just for those of you interested, 1 minute about what happens in Quaker meetings. We call them meetings of worship. They take place in silence unless somebody feels called to stand up and give ministry, speak. And then there is silence until somebody else decides they want to follow that up. We have no creed. We have no music. We certainly have no dress code. So it's quite normal for people to turn up to Quaker meetings in their dirty anoraks like I often do. We have no sacraments. We have no leaders. We have no priest at all. Okay. But there is that of God in everyone, whatever that sentence and that word G-O-D means. Okay, so how do I as a Quaker therefore address this global problem of climate change? Well, I think the first thing you do is really establish what are the important data, important numbers, and what is trivia. And I strongly recommend this wonderful book written by David Mackay 9 years ago. It's called Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air. Okay, in England, if you speak a lot of hot air, it means you'll gabble on about nothing. It's completely irrelevant. You can actually download this book for free from the internet, and I really mean that. It's about 200 pages long. You can download the whole lot for not a penny. And if you're interested in something, I strongly suggest you do that. And there's the ISBN. And this is David Mackay, and he was a very keen cyclist, and that's him on his bike. The very, very sad thing is this man was about 40 when he wrote this book. He then developed stomach cancer 6 years later at a very young age, and he died in 2016. I think he was 46 or 47. That's a very young age in a developed country like ours. So all his data is what was relevant in 2009. I'm sure it could be updated, but not by him. And I've constructed here what I think is that one of the critical tables. It says, how much CO2 can we emit if the increase in the Earth's temperature is going to be limited to 2 degrees by the end of this century? This is what the United Nations Paris meeting hoped would happen. And of course, the reduction in CO2 emission is going to be even greater if we can get down to 1.5 degrees. But these are Mackay's data for 2 degrees. Okay, and the units are capital T for metric tons per person per year, where 1 ton equals 1,000 kilograms. That doesn't matter, it's just that everything's on a common scale here. Now, planet Earth, to the best of my knowledge, we have about 7.3 billion people living on this planet. And on average over all those 7.3 billion, we consume about 6 tons of CO2 per person per year. And that's got to come down to 1.5. That's a big drop. If I then split that up into very different countries, I'm sure a lot of people here from China, okay? The China population is about 1.4 billion. Actually, at the moment in China it's going up, but at the moment the average consumption of CO2 is the world average, it is also 6. So each Chinese person, every 1.4 billion of you, has got to get that down to 1.5. India is moving ahead fast with technology, so they're below the average at the moment. Okay, but I'm sure as technology comes in, that number will increase rapidly. Can they hold it to 1.5? And then we could come to the good old European Union, 27 countries in it. The total population of the Union is about 0.5 billion or 500 million. The average over all 27 countries, would you believe it, is 15. We've got to get 15 down to 1.5. We can smile sweetly and say, oh, we're doing fine in Britain. Our population is 0.06 of a billion, about 64 million. We're below the EU average, would you believe it? We're at 14. We've still got to get 14 down to 1.5. But I don't know whether there are any people from America here. Are there any Americans here? No? Or you weren't admitted? The population of North America is 320 million. The average person there consumes 23 metric tons per person per year. 23 has got to come down to 1.5. And really, Mr. Trump should have that slide at his bedside and think about it every single night. 23 has to come down to 1.5. So Mackay then concentrated on the UK, and he changes units, which can be a bit confusing, and he now uses energy usage per person per day, kilowatt hours of energy usage per person per K in the UK. And in 2009, the average person in the UK used 125 roughly of these units. And the Climate Act, which we passed in 2008, says that we've got to get that down to about 15 by the end of this century. So what Mackay then did, made some suggestions about what we could do, individual actions that we could do that might help. And all these numbers have huge errors in them, but that's not the point. It's just the direction of travel. So some of them are, in my opinion, very simple and obvious. We could turn down thermostats in the winter and wear more clothes. Now, in the middle of July, when the weather is like this, that's completely irrelevant. But it was bloody cold in this country in March. And if we just turned down thermostats and wore more clothes, he thought in 2009 we might save about 20 of these units in 125. That's a big, big saving. He then said, can we modify our means of short distance transport? Now here I can put my hand up and say I do that because I live 4 miles away. I come in by bike every single day. So every single day I cycle 8 miles. Okay? And as a family, our car usage has dropped enormously in the last 5 years. And I think it will carry on dropping. It is our contribution to this. What Mackay means is, do we really need to use a car to travel 1 mile to the shop, or 1 mile to go to the University of Birmingham where we might work? He then said if we became vegetarian, we wouldn't need so many animals, we wouldn't have so much methane emission, we might save about 10 kilowatt hours a person per day. And then the thing that we all get worked up about, converting light to LED and keeping old computers and all that sort of stuff. The numbers are small, but this is a big one. This is the big one. Stop flying. He said if everybody stopped flying, we could reduce 125 down by 35 units to, 90. Is that realistic? Most of you has come to the United Kingdom by flying. Of course it's not realistic for you. But I do think there is an awful lot of flying that goes on in this planet that is really just not necessary, and technology could solve a lot of this. So much of business travel, you really wonder whether it's necessary. You know, if somebody flies in from here, 2 people, those two, they meet a third place, normally in an airport lounge, and fly back. Skype technology is so advanced now, and Skype is being extended to a multiple piece of people. So I've been involved in 6-way conversations, 6 people all around the world. And that will get better and better and better as the years go by. So I do think there is a lot that could be done to reduce the amount of flying that we all do. But we're never going to move forward by saying stop. And then David Attenborough is evangelical about this. Can we avoid buying clutter and avoiding excess packaging? Too right. You go to the shops and so many things are in plastic packaging. Why? If you go to buy a cucumber, it's saying it's wrapped in plastic. Why? You go to Spar, it's not. Why? Why can Spar do it? Sainsbury's can't. It absolutely beats me. But these are small, these are what I call individual actions that could be taken. And so this is what we could do, but this is absolutely everybody's problem. You can't opt out of this problem. It affects everybody, all 7.3 billion people on this planet. And you can't just look the other way and say that's their problem, or that mummy and daddy's problem. Okay, and if the UK think they're getting uppity about this, we contribute 2% of global emissions, but we only have 1% of the world's population. So we're over the mark. We are using too much energy, emitted too much CO2 given the number of people we are, because we are a developed country and because we travel a lot and we fly a lot. Okay, so what do we do? Well, okay, I'm a very keen cyclist where I'm not fallen off my bike. This was me about 4 years ago, doing a big 100-mile charity ride for a leukemia research charity. These are ghastly pictures that appeared in 1914 as the First World War got going. Lord Kitchener, your country needs you, your king and country needs you. Like bloody hell, they need me. Well, they won't get me because I'm a former CO, conscience objector. But joking apart, what my papers are saying is that we should concentrate much more on the demand side of this equation rather than the supply side. We get very worked up in this country about should we have solar PV or wind farm or tidal barriers or this green or that green. But can't we just do the obvious thing and use less energy at the same time as not turning the clock back 300 years? That is so important. So if I am an optimist, I have got some bullet points there which are called 6 reasons for cautious optimism. And this is me speaking. I have to accept that other people may not agree with this. I think there is a realization now that there was not 10 years ago. That harping on about the past and feel guilty about why we're in the situation we are, that will get us nowhere. We are where we are, whether we like it or not. And that must be our starting point. I personally think that there seems to be less and less talk about carbon trading. In other words, one country is saying to another, you take some of our carbon and we'll pay you some money to do that. This is grossly immoral, and it is doomed to fail. And it's immoral because this is a true global problem. And how many other problems can you think of that are truly global problems? I can think there's only one that gets anywhere close to this, which is nuclear weapons. If some silly bugger lets off a nuclear weapon, that's going to affect, if not the whole planet, at least 50%, I would suspect. I'm glad to say that the climate skeptics, I think, have now disappeared in this country. They've now become rabid Brexiteers, I'm afraid. Alas, that's not yet true in America and Mr. Trump. I refuse to call him President Trump. He's Mr. Trump. And I hope he really is Mr. Trump when the next presidential election takes place in 2020. Being very positive and serious, science and politics can work together. Some of you may know that the stratospheric ozone problem, which was first discovered by British scientists in the 1980s, that led to the Montreal Protocol, dare I say, advanced by Mrs. Thatcher, who was then our Prime Minister at the time. I sometimes think it was the best thing she did in her time as Prime Minister. She led on this, and the hope, the prediction, the modelling is that this problem will have been solved in the second half of this century. Green energy is coming down in cost very rapidly, especially wind energy. Solar is a few years ahead. Perhaps tidal energy will follow, I don't know. Perhaps this last point is not true, but my real hope is that nuclear energy and shale gas fracking are not the answers to our problem with energy. And I think that realization is very, very, very slowly getting into the brains of the relevant people in the UK government. But of course, we are a mixed country. We're young, we're old, we're healthy, we're not healthy, we're disabled, or we're infirm. So whatever I suggest, it cannot apply to everybody. Okay, but this is now becomes a bit of, I've got 2 or 3 more slides, this now becomes a bit of a joke. What happens if I stood for Parliament, representing the Quaker Green Party, and let us suppose I became Prime Minister on a ticket to really sort this global problem out? That would be my #1 business. Forget bloody Brexit, forget all the rest of it, sort out the environment. What would I do? And I have to assume I've got hundreds of civil servants who were working for me who could do anything I suggested at the drop of a button. Well, some of these I've already suggested. I would suggest that legislation was introduced to reduce the minimum working temperature from about 17 degrees to about 15 degrees, corresponding with just people wearing more clothes. Sounds simple, but it's so complicated to get people to do this. A very small effect might be that I personally would abolish Sunday trading. Now, all of you people presuming are in your 20s, and Sunday trading became law in this country in the early 1990s. But I was then roughly 40 years old, and I'd lived perfectly happily for 40 years without being able to buy my milk or my sandwich or whatever at a shop on Sunday. Do we really need to have all shops open on Sunday? Because that comes with a huge carbon load associated with it. I accept that as a small effect. I would price domestic air travel in the UK completely out of the market. It is absolutely absurd that you can fly from Birmingham to Edinburgh cheaper than you can get a train from Birmingham to Edinburgh. Absolutely crazy. I'm actually giving something like this talk at an international meeting in Edinburgh in the middle of October. And I feel very virtuous because I've now booked my rail tickets bloody cheap because I'm 12 weeks in advance. Okay, so I joke about this, but I mean it. Why the hell do we fly between cities in this country? Because it doesn't save time. It really doesn't. The only time it might save if you flew from Aberdeen to Penzance, that might save 2 or 3 hours. But Birmingham to Edinburgh, door to door, it doesn't save time at all. It is a myth to think that air travel is going to be faster. If we're going to do that, we've got to have a huge expansion of train travel and safe cycling routes. We are starting to get there, in my opinion. Starting, but it could be accelerated. We have a very fast new high-speed line being built from London to Birmingham. It's called HS2. I think it will open in 2026. That will be then extended up to Manchester and Leeds, HS3. Personally, I would have HS4, HS5, HS6, HS99, the whole bloody lot. Let's have really good, fast train travel so that people can move about quickly and safely. People in this room may not know this, but essentially state education was deregulated in 1988. So you can almost go to wherever you want. It's your choice. We are consumers, apparently. I would abolish that. So you should just go to your local school. Because, very interesting, we talk about the school run. Have people heard this phrase, the school run? It's not a run at all. It's piling into cars so that school children's parents can get them to their school by car. And that's a new phrase in the English language, only since 1988. And we could insulate houses so much better. This is happening, I'm glad to say, with all new builds. But what needs to happen is we need to apply this to all old houses as well. Those are what I call the easy problems. Some of them we can make ourselves. Some of them, if I was Prime Minister, I could press a button and it would happen. Those are easy. What's more difficult? These are the issues we have to talk about. Well, you can't get away from the fact that if you use a lot of carbon, then the polluter should pay. You should pay. This is the principle of the polluter pays. So I think that in 20 or 30 years we will get to a system of what's often called a carbon tax via credit cards. So you have to pay to taxation if you travel a large amount of money, a large amount of distance by car or by train or certainly by plane. I think Canada was thinking of doing this. I'm not sure whether they backed off or not. I'm told that when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister in this country from I think 2007 to 2010, he started on this, and he had a huge team of civil servants working on this, but they persuaded him it was politically unacceptable, and the idea got dropped. I don't know if that's true, but I'm fairly sure that that will happen. This principle of if we cause pollution, we must pay for it, because ultimately that's what people understand: money in your pocket. Food, what we eat and where it comes from. I could talk for an hour about that. It's crazy. Why do we eat apples now that come all the way from New Zealand with all the large costs and carbon costs in getting the apple from New Zealand right the way around the world to the UK? And then finally, what would be incredibly difficult to implement? Would I stay in power a month, let alone a week, if it even suggested it? And this is an issue that really gets people hot under the collar, and it's all to do with population levels. Population level within a family, within a country, and within a world. Okay, now I'm sure you all know, certainly in the West, you know, this is an area no government will ever go. It's up to the individual. Is it going to have children? How many children they have? But it would not be difficult for this government to say, well, perhaps we should limit access to the welfare state for large families, whatever large means. Could be more than 5, could be more than 3, could be, I don't know. I have given this talk in different guises, and sitting next to me is somebody from this university. Nice good person. He hasn't blinked, but I'm not going to stop saying it. He has 9 children, and he's not Catholic. He has 9 children, which is him and his wife choice. Well, that's fine, but I think there will become a time where there is a price to pay for that. And then what about world population? Is this an important issue? And again, I think there are 2 diametrically opposed points on this, both of which ironically are correct. David Attenborough is of the view that it's bloody obvious that 11 billion is going to cause problem, whereas 7 billion we might get away with. End of story. That's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is that, oh, it's not quite as simple as that, because all the growth in population is in the poorer countries of the world, like Africa and parts of Asia. And their carbon usage is much, much, much less than what happens in the developed West. So the developed West should not try preaching on to other countries about their population level. They should sort out their own problems. So these are what I call two diametrically opposite views on this, and they're both right in my opinion. It's a question of which is a stronger argument. I personally come down to thinking that the Attenborough argument is the strongest, and that somehow we have got to somehow limit the world's population growth as is predicted. And these are the numbers. We had 3.3 billion in when I was 10 years old, 1964. We're now 7.3 billion. Where we're going to be by the end of this century, somewhere between 10 and 12 seems to be what the figure that most people are coming down to. Seems to me that the only organization that could take any lead on this is the United Nations. And I do strongly believe they have got a big group working on population issues. I would like that expanded out of all recognition, because I think this is a real serious problem. Okay, so that's the end. I'm sorry, I can't quite see the time. What is time? Okay, right. So, thank you so much for listening patiently and putting up with my strange voice. But just read, please, just read that second paragraph. I believe that if this goes badly wrong, mass migration from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere is very likely to happen. And that must give anybody cause for food for thought. There are two papers coming out on this subject. This talk is basically what's in the second paper. The first paper is putting the science of greenhouse gases into simple language, but bringing all the numbers directly up to date. I will give this PowerPoint to Steve, and I'm sure you can distribute it. So if anybody's interested, they can actually download these DOI numbers and get these papers. I mean, in other words, I am serious. I am prepared to put pen to paper and write down what I've been talking about for the last hour, because I think this is a really, really serious problem. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, Steve said, if anybody's got any questions, I mean, are there any immediate questions?
We're a little short of time. If there's any burning questions, we can ask Professor Tuckett. Otherwise, you can send him an email with your question on it.
So if I give you my email,
I'll send it to you.
Then you can get it out to these guys. Thank you for being so quiet and patient. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Water there.